Faraway Wanderers. Chapter 76, Finale, Part 2. Lord Seventh was in a restaurant, cup of tea in hand as he messed with a heap of sticks on the table. He looked serious, as if his divinings were actually reliable. Smiling slightly, the great shaman sat quietly across from him, feeling extraordinarily calm and delighted as he watched him amuse himself. However, he heard the other gasp a bit. "This divining looks a bit interesting." "Why?" Lord Seventh side-eyed him. "Don't you think me to be inaccurate?" The other smiled. "When did I ever say that? I gave you a palm reading in the capital 10 years ago, but you, as a little brat, said that I was full of nonsense and didn't even come close," Lord Seventh answered, counting on his fingers. The great shaman's eyes curved, showing a bit of a nostalgic expression. "Right, I remember. You said that my bond signifying heaven line is long and deep. I'm an infatuated person, and my journey of love will be anything goes, with great luck and benefits," he continued, gentle. "You also said that the one I admired was a staunchly loyal woman. I didn't believe you then, but looking back on it, you actually got it pretty much right. Except for the woman part." Lord Seventh was taken aback, eyebrows twitching, then seemed to somewhat bashfully lower his head to drink his tea and vainly avoid the other's gaze. "You remember that pretty clearly, punk," he mumbled. Wuxi laughed. "You divined for Manor Lord Zhou and the rest? What did it say?" The other paused, his lowered eyes gliding over the sticks again. "One placed within a land of death will fight for their survival. The shape of the divination says." He appeared to want to go on and on about this, but upon getting up to there, he unexpectedly trailed off, smile falling. He tilted his head to see down the stairs. The great shaman followed his line of sight, only to see a man come in through the door. He furrowed his brow, as well. The man had something indescribable about him. He had a head of white hair, a heavy sword on his back, and a small jar in his hand. The instant he entered, the scarce amount of people inside the restaurant all seemed to pause, gazes drawn to him. As if sensing something, the man looked up to cross gazes with the great shaman. The latter's eyes focused in, and he let out a small exclamation. "That's the ancient blade of the dragon's back," he muttered. "This man." The arrival was Ye Bai. After a stop in his tracks, he suddenly went straight for the two. "Is a guy named Josu staying here?" he asked. Lord Seventh sized him up, thoughts turning around and around. "You are?" "Ye Bai." Ye Bai nodded, sitting next to them without any bit of politeness. "I'm looking for him. He's tailing the poisonous scorpions to Fenja Mountain. You can wait here for him, or I can relay anything you have to say to him." The other looked him up and down, thinking about it. "Are you the one the CAO kid said could treat that brat, Josu?" Lord Seventh pointed at the great shaman. "That'd be him." Ye Bai's eyes landed on the latter, slightly inquiring. The great shaman was only looking at his white hair. "This is the result of the real six harmonies mental cultivation, right?" Turning his head, he saw Lord Seventh looking intrigued, and patiently explained it to him. "One that practices the six harmonies has only two paths: they either chi deviate, or reach the pinnacle, having the alleged arts of being one with the heavens, unable to construct without destruction." Ye Bai sneered. "There are no arts of being one with the heavens in this world. If humanity and the heavens weren't separate from each other, living would be of no interest." The great shaman gave him a look. "This cultivation method has reached the top tier, and can be stated to be divine arts that are unparalleled in the world, to the extent that one won't age or die. However, it has a flaw in that one can never eat warm things from that point on, needing to drink snow water and cold food when passing their days." As he said that, Lord Seventh's eyes went to Ye Bai. The latter was in the middle of very casually rinsing out a cup and then pouring himself some hot tea, which he delivered to his mouth. "With your strength, you shouldn't have a head full of white hair," nor an aura of death, the great shaman said, also watching him. That's been caused by you leaving the extreme cold of Changming Mountain and eating the food of ordinary humans, isn't it? Ye Bai stiffly pulled up the corners of his mouth into a smile. You'll understand once you live to my age, brat. Dying after a year of being a living human is much better than continuing to be the living dead for centuries in that place. The great shaman shook his head. I'm perfectly alive. I also don't practice martial arts for turning into the living dead. Ye Bai paid no mind to his lack of courtesy, merely gazing at the liquid in the cup like he was viewing someplace far away through it, eyes twinkling. It was a long time before he spoke. Many years ago, a friend of mine had a setback in his martial practice. I wanted to save him, but didn't have the skills you do, so there was only one road to take. Afterwards, he felt sorry, and brought his wife with him to accompany me in seclusion on Changming. There's a ruined temple there that people off the mountain have no clue about, and believe that an immortal monk lives inside. As he spoke, it seemed like he had been hiding these words for too long, unable to keep himself from grabbing everything and pouring it out before two strangers he had met by coincidence. He thought about how if he didn't say more now, there would likely be no other chance for him to say it in his lifetime. That friend was a hard-hearted one, but actually had no sense. Their family of 3 frolicked in front of me all day long, and I hated those eyesores. I taught his kid martial arts, but at some point, the brat started having thoughts about the 6 harmonies. His mother wasn't a stupid woman, but she was a mother, after all. Saying as much, he shook his head despondently. I wasn't thinking, either. If something was good, why couldn't I give it to him? I treated him like my own. He couldn't continue, only sighing. The writ of the world once appeared 30 years ago, the great shaman took over. You are wrong, Xian's Shifu. That's me. Ye Bai nodded. Not long after I had come down the mountain, I sought out Qin Huaizhang, the former lord of Four Seasons Manor, to follow the kid's trail. Back then, though, the manor's wings weren't filled out yet, so its power was limited. All he found was Rong Xian's corpse, and the thing about the 5 families' descendants and the lapis armor was vaguely touched upon. The investigation later got cut short, owing to my friend, Chang Qing. He felt that he had let me down, and was suddenly suffering the pain of mourning his own son. Sicknesses of the heart are difficult to treat. He was near death. The great shaman nodded. So, that was Senior Rong Chang Qing. He thereafter turned his head to fill Lord 7th in. Senior Rong used to be called Ghost Hand, and was a famed craftsman of his generation. Great Famine, which you gave to the child, and the flexible sword, which you gave to Manor Lord Zhou, were both made by him. Ye Bai's face was as stiff as ever, but his mouth raised into a smile. He grazed the rim of his teacup with his fingers. That's him. That flexible sword is actually the sword of no name. Since it had no name, it changed to Bai after it got to my hands, but that Zhou guy didn't recognize the goods that he had. He likely still hasn't learned, either. In the years since Elder Rong's death, have you had to face Madame Rong day and night? Lord 7th suddenly asked. The other's smile suddenly turned somewhat bitter. Yeah. Chang Qing is dead, so I don't know why she still keeps me company in immortality, in that place that's a coffin for the living. I don't have anything to say to her, either. Typically, I just practice my arts while she lives her own life. At the beginning, she could nod or exchange empty pleasantries with me, but later on, we came to be mutually silent. Thinking about it, I haven't said a word to her in over a decade. Lord 7th took a divination stick and lightly struck it against his teacup, not saying a word. Ye Bai drank down the rest of his tea in one gulp, stood up, and placed the small jar he held onto the tabletop. I'm not going back. Since you lot are going to go to Changming with that Zhou guy, help me out by bringing Rong Xian and his wife with. Their family of 4 can go on by themselves. Now done speaking, he turned to leave. Lord Seventh suddenly called out to stop him. Have you still not let him go after all these years, brother yet? The man turned back to look at him. I never held him to begin with. How could I let him go? With that, he departed in strides, sword on his back. I've finally returned your son to you, Chang Qing. Your family can reunite, and Dragon's Back will accompany me. In our next lives, we won't be seeing each other in the world. If not home, where shall I go today? Meanwhile, on Fenja Mountain, a group suddenly showed up right when everybody was equally exhausted. It was as if they had dropped down from the sky. Their leader was a young man dressed in silks, and behind him was a trailing black mass of poisonous scorpions. Right then, the scarred man that had been by Zhao Jing's side suddenly came out and knelt down on one knee. Master, he called out to the scorpion. What a shame that Zhao Jing was already dead, else he would have no idea what to do in this situation. The scorpion nodded, gaze sweeping across the area. With full satisfaction, he discovered that out of his 3 customers, Zhao Jing, Sun Ding, and Lao Meng 2.5 out of 3 were now dead. All that remained was Lao Meng's bloodied half-self, who was looking at him ecstatically with a face of relief. The head scorpion laughed coldly. I trust every hero here has been well since our last meeting, he stated in a peculiar tone. The smile on Lao Meng's face froze. He looked on as the head scorpion waved his hand, and then as the black-clothed scorpions filed up to encircle the entire scene. What is the meaning of this, Scorpion Master? He raged. The other grinned. I'm collecting my interest. Following that, he laughed crisply and loudly, feeling that on this earth, no one was superior to him. Regardless of whether one was of the righteous or demonic faction, they would die while he would live, and none of them could get out of the scope of his manipulations. He was so overly self-confident, that he didn't realize that one of the scorpions he had brought with him wasn't conforming. The day before the scorpions had moved out, Zhou Zishu had snatched an opportunity to become one by substituting for another. He was taking a risk, but luckily, the scorpion's desire for control was so strong, his people normally said nothing other than yes. He had been intending to be close to the scorpion so that he could easily deal with him when the time came, yet, upon coming to the scene and surveying it, he didn't see Wen Kexing's figure at all. Noiselessly, like an invisible man, he had mixed in with the scorpions without batting an eye, gaze searching about all over the place. All of a sudden, his eyes widened as he caught sight of a familiar figure behind a huge boulder. It was Gu Xiang. His heart jumped rapidly. In the span of a second, all sorts of scenarios streaked across his mind. Why was Gu Xiang here? She got injured. Where was Wen Kexing? He took a deep breath, forcefully controlled himself, and carefully withdrew from the crowd. After slipping behind the boulder, he slowly leaned over, stood there rigidly for a minute, then stooped over to gently search for breath beneath the girl's nose using his hand. He knew that there was no logic behind such an action. Her body was already cold, that ever-smiling face no longer having any life to it. A long while later, he straightened back up, then let out a breath that had been stuffed up tight in his chest. Savagely tearing both the mask and disguise off of his face, he thought to himself, damn it all, where did Wen Kexing go? At this same exact time, the head scorpion had finished gloating, and then couldn't help but be startled. He had also realized that the Ghost Valley Master wasn't present. The hanged ghost still hadn't shown up at this point, and the Ghost Master was nowhere to be seen. A dark cloud seemed to be covering the scorpion's head. The more he thought, the more disquieted he was. Increasingly feeling that the remainder of those left here were nothing to be worried about, he thus called a scorpion over, ordered such and such from him, and then went to search Fenja Mountain himself with the rest. If he did not watch the one he was fearful of die in front of him, it would forever be hard for him to be at ease. Mo Huayang believed himself to have escaped. He had fled more than half a shishan away from Fenja before he sighed in relief, yet, all of a sudden, a burst of rustling noises came to his ears. He quickly lifted his head up, then immediately took a huge step backwards in fright. Wen Kexing was like the king of hell come to life. His pace was slow as he exited the other end of the forest. In one of his hands was a sword he had picked up from some unknown dead person, and its tip dragged as he walked over, step by step. "Sect leader Mo," he said. "This humble one was entrusted with seeing you off on your journey, if you please." With every step he took, his tattered sleeves trailed on the ground, leaving thin traces of blood behind them. His walking posture was a bit off, as if he was stubbornly hauling along half of his immobile body. While he was speaking, a minute wound on his face had split open to seep once more, and he lightly lapped up the blood that fell from it, still approaching. Mo Huayang gritted his teeth. He knew that when Kexing was an arrow nearing the end of its trajectory was the Ghost Valley Master a god. The other had been besieged by several experts, just by himself, for several shishans, then had been stabbed by Zhao Jing prior to his death. Anyone else would have fainted long ago, so he didn't believe that the man was capable of doing much. Even with those thoughts, though, his calves still slightly shook. When Kexing tilted his head to the side, chuckling, Mo Huayang suddenly roared madly, and the Qingfeng sword once held by sect leaders past was unsheathed. Exerting everything he had learned in his entire life, he made a maneuver that was airtight. The other also made a move. One of his hands was useless, which made the action very sluggish, and his worn-out sword was turned into several pieces by Qingfeng. Mo Huayang was delighted, turning his hand around to pair off the arm with the ruined sword, but there was only an after-image left of the one in front of him, and then, he was gone. Mo Huayang mentally exclaimed that this wasn't good, and in the next second, there was a chill on his neck. His entire body froze. When Kexing's broken chunk of sword was stuck in his throat, ice-cold fingers seeming to bump up against his skin. The man sighed. "I'm out of strength," he whispered. Immediately after that, he pushed his hand forward, and blood spurted far out of Mo Huayang's neck. The latter convulsed all over as he collapsed, making gurgling noises from his throat. Soon, his blood all drained away, and he stopped moving. When Kexing appeared to be unable to keep on standing. He stumbled, then miserably fell into a sit on the ground. "I'm sorry, Osyang," he vacantly thought, "for allowing him to die so quickly." Osyang. What an aggravating little girl. For more than 10 years, he had lived in darkness, no daylight. The sole living thing that had accompanied him was now gone. Footsteps sounded out from not too far away, and then a familiar voice was heard to speak. "No wonder I hadn't seen you, Valley Master. Turns out you're just here, cooling off in the shade." When Kexing felt that he ought to stand up, kill this man, and then keep on living, but he didn't have one bit of power to muster up. All he could sense was weariness. Mutely turning his head, he looked at the head scorpion and his ill-intentioned grin. After 20 years of bearing with humiliation for the sake of his goals, and everything he had been wanting to do now being accomplished, was he going to die here? End chapter. Faraway Wanderers. Chapter 77, Finale, Part 3. In spite of Wen Kexing's tragic, powerless appearance, the head scorpion still stood 2 jong apart from him, beaming and clucking his tongue. How unexpected, how unexpected! Wen Kexing was still able to force out a smile. "What's unexpected?" he asked lightly. The scorpion shook his head. "Ghost Master, no matter how impressive and capable one is, when they fall into such a plight, who can say how the ways of the world go for certain?" The other sucked in a breath that only seemed to reach his chest, making his answer very feeble. "How wrong you are, Brother Scorpion. I've been the Ghost Master for 8 years, yet have never had one day of peaceful sleep. What's so impressive there?" The scorpion pondered this, then nodded. You're right. People like us don't get the happy, worry-free lives that common folk do. Looking at this extraordinary, uncommon man, Wen Kexing smiled. I dare not compare myself to your world-encompassing ability, brother Scorpion. Me being unable to sleep well was only because I was afraid that someone else would kill me. Now, there's finally no need for me to be scared anymore. That's true, the Scorpion said with a nod. You're about to die, so there's naturally no need for you to fear death. Lao Meng, you killed him? Wen Kexing suddenly asked. The man laughed mockingly. If I didn't kill him, wouldn't I just be waiting around for him to kill me first, then? That was your devoted old servant, Ghost Master, but he still wholeheartedly wanted you to die. Why trouble yourself with keeping him on your mind? Wen Kexing nodded at that. How many are left alive in the valley? The Scorpion felt that this guy had way too many hang-ups, but replied anyways. Do you need to ask? Zhao got rid of half, and the remaining half of the injured ranks inevitably fell into my hands. How unthinkable of you to be so magnanimous. You have no time to look after yourself, yet are still worried over the lives and deaths of the valley's people. Out of successive generations of ghost masters, you really are the most affectionate and loyal one. Wen Kexing silently laughed. His expression was somewhat bizarre, but he still sounded calm. Evil ghosts on the verge of death are still ghosts. They likely weren't easy to deal with. There are those amongst my men that are suicide warriors, the Scorpion answered, not concerned in the least. A couple hundreds of them dying isn't much. Nor do I care. All right, Wen Kexing said, shutting his eyes. You're very driven and bold in style, brother Scorpion. You deserve to be the formidable figure of a generation, Lao Meng. The most tragic thing about him is none other than the fact that despite clearly being on the board, he still believed himself to be the one holding the pawns. Laughable, isn't it? His lips could barely be seen to move on those last few words, which were almost difficult to hear. Seeing this, the Scorpion looked to be reassured, and he stepped forward a bit. Of course. You're someone that's open-minded, Ghost Master, hand me your hook. As soon as he put his hand out, someone placed a weapon onto it. He restrained his grin as he looked at Wen Kexing, who was leaning against a tree and already finding it challenging to move. Someone like you should be done in by my own hands. Using another for this would be rather rude. While he spoke, he raised the hook horizontally across his chest, then slowly came forwards. Please go on ahead to Yellow Spring Road, Ghost Master. He then raised the hook up high. When Kexing opened his pitch-black eyes, gazing at him calmly, there looked to be pools of stagnant water inside them. It was like the one that was going to die was not him. All of a sudden, the Scorpion felt a strong gale attacking him from the side. Its intent to kill was much too prominent, and all of his hairs were made to stand on end from that murderous aura. With a loud shout, he heft the hook even higher to obstruct it. The new arrival was a black-clothed man dressed as a poisonous scorpion, yet with no mask, and the flexible sword he held dodged past the hook to unshakably wind around the scorpion's arm. The man screamed as said arm was swept up, after which it fell clean away from him. The few poisonous scorpions behind him promptly and obediently came forth in reaction. All that was heard was a spell of clanging noises, and seen was an eye-dazzling display. In a wink's time, the dust settled, one stood alone while several laid, and every one of the latter was missing their weapon-wielding arm, whether they were even alive or not. When Kexing got a clear view of the newcomer, only to sigh. Idiot, he whispered. Why did you come here? Zhou shot him a glance out of the corner of his eye, smiling coldly. I came to collect your corpse, you lunatic. The great shaman's medicine had suppressed the 7 acupuncture's nails, and Zhou's skill was now reinstated to about 90% of its peak period. Even if he fought alone and out in the open, there was no way the scorpion would be his match, to say nothing of what he had just done being classified as a sneak attack. Josisha turned to him, the tip of his sword slightly hanging, voice slightly harsh. "You dare act against whose mine?" Wen Kexing stared blankly at the back that was blocking his sight. His fingers that were dangling down to the ground faintly began to tremble. The head scorpion's complexion was paling from the pain, but he squeezed out a smile anyways. "Ah, it's you, Brother Joe," he managed. "I didn't know that you would be gracing us with your presence. My mistake." He looked eerily at the two, then waved his hand. "An expert has arrived, so we won't be inviting ridicule for ourselves. For us, the green hills never change, and the clear water runs forever retreat." The few still living scorpions scrambled up and swiftly followed after him as he drew back. Josisha didn't give chase, merely turning around to look at Wen Kexing. The latter's eyes flashed, but he smiled. "You should still be careful about." Before he could finish, Josisha's pupils shrank. His body whirled around, and turned into a pretty pattern of after-images. It struck something with a ding, following which a muffled grunt came from the forest in back. He shook his head with a sigh. Using the same trick twice on the same person, do these scorpions do anything other than the same old stuff? From that alone, how are they on par with Four Seasons Manor at all? Wen Kexing stared at him for a minute, entranced, then began to smile, reaching a hand up high to grab the air. Josisha frowned. "What are you doing?" "There's light around you," Wen Kexing whispered. "I'm catching it so I can see." Josisha raised a brow slightly. Crossing his arms in front of his chest, he leaned against the trunk of a big tree. "Actually, Xuefang isn't even around, is he?" Wen Kexing kept grinning. He looked at his own fingers obsessively, then loosened them a little, as if something might leak out of his completely empty palm. His voice was still extremely quiet, and his breaths were like fine silk, as if they could be cut off at any time. "You could tell." "What about the real key?" "Lost, since I threw it off the top of the mountain," Wen Kexing answered slowly, narrowing his eyes. Josisha nodded, suddenly not knowing how to react. With no key, there was no point in having the lapis armor, and everyone that had fought to the death on Fenja Mountain, ultimately fighting themselves into corpses, had not known unto death that what they were fighting over was actually just a pile of junk. "It took me 3 years to secretly foster Sun Ding," Wen Kexing softly went on. "How else could such a brain-dead moron be a rival to the Hanged Ghost and Ghost of Impermanence? After that, you lured the Hanged Ghost into stealing the key when their fight was getting white-hot." Wen Kexing laughed. "I didn't have it, yet they all wanted it. 30 years ago, evil ghosts of all sizes began to long for the arsenal. The lapis armor belonged to the 5 major clans while the ghosts weren't yet established, so they didn't dare to act too rashly, only able to get things going with the key," he explained in a whisper. Then, he turned his head away and coughed twice, which brought some traces of blood out with them. He gently wiped them off of his face before continuing. "Back in the day, Madame Rong gave the key to my father. They all thought that only 3 had been present, then. Madame Rong died, and Long K safeguarded the secret to his grave. If things actually had been like that, the world would have been very peaceful, wouldn't it? There was a 4th. Josisha creased his brow, following which he had a quick realization. Was it Zhao Zheng? He didn't have any real power back then, so since he was unable to talk about this with people from righteous sects, he secretly joined up with Ghost Valley. Probably, they're all dead now, in any case." Wen Kexing let out a cold laugh, remaining silent for a long time before he took a deep breath. "It's ridiculous that Madame Rong and the rest never ended up telling my father what exactly the key they gave him was, all for the sake of keeping their secret. He only saw it as something important that could never be thrown out, which was why he took my mother to hide out in a small mountain village for a full 10 years, alas, on the year that I was 9, Something unfortunate happened in that village. An owl. Enough, Josishu interrupted. After a minute of quiet, he softened his tone. That's enough. It's already been so many years, you don't need to. My parents believed that they were implicating the villagers, the other went on regardless. They wanted to fight until the bitter end, and simply sent me away the night of. I wasn't worried and didn't know my own weight, so I snuck back. I saw. He sighed, slowly raising his head to gaze at the vague, dim sky. I saw my father's body, cut into 2 pieces. My mother was collapsed to the side. Her hair was in disarray, her clothes weren't their original color anymore, her face had been mutilated, her nose had been cut off, the outline of her features was unseeable, and a staff had pierced her through her chest and out her back, passing right under her shoulder blades. Do you know how I recognized her? Josishu watched him without a word. I liked pretty people when I was young, and thought that my mom was the most beautiful person in the world. I liked to cling to her and tell her to carry me, so I got used to seeing her shoulder blades. Even when I die, I won't forget that. That's how the key landed in Ghost Valley's hands, but, how did you? Me. Wen Kexing raised his brows, then suddenly started to laugh. The more he laughed, the louder he got, until a whimper-like noise finally came out of his throat. It was unclear whether he was actually laughing, or sobbing. Me? I stumbled several times on my journey there, and came to look like a filthy mud monkey long before that. The second those evil ghosts noticed me, I believed that I was going to die, and stood there stupefied. One came over and grabbed me, but then I subconsciously bit him, making him yell and say, "It's a little lunatic." The people surrounding me laughed. One woman said that she wanted to peel my skin off to turn it into a human leather coat when she got back. I was horribly scared, so I thought up a solution. Josishu's throat bobbed slightly, brow slightly creased, yet he still said nothing. It had already gotten late in the day. There was utter silence all around. Wen Kexing coughed a few more times, then continued. Right under all their watching eyes, I walked over, laid on my stomach, and bit mouthful after mouthful off of my dad's corpse. He wasn't easy to chew through, and it took a long time to tear pieces off, then swallow his flesh down into my stomach, and I put a little thought into my head, was I not made of his blood to begin with? As they watched, they slowly quit laughing. Ultimately, the man I had bitten was in charge, and he said that I had been born a ghost, so I shouldn't remain in the human world. After that, he brought me back with him to Ghost Valley. Josishu leaned down, then placed a hand on the side of Wen Kexing's face. Perhaps due to blood loss, the man's eyes were slightly unfocused, and his skin was freezing. Upon feeling warmth, he unconsciously tilted his head to nuzzle into his palm. "I've been here for a full 20 years, he said, breathless. "For the first 12, I desperately survived, desperately climbed upwards, desperately, for the next 8, I had finally climbed to the top, and prepared for my main event. You secretly aided Sun Ding, forced the hanged ghost into dire straits, baited him into stealing the key, tailed him, killed him, and then disposed of both his corpse and the key," Josishu picked up. "This created the veneer that he had fled, thus making Ghost Valley come out in full force to hunt him down. You watched Sun Ding and Lao Meng each harbor their own motives, watched them. In this world, when Kexing cut him off, there is only one thing that can destroy evil spirits, and it's the human heart." He abruptly turned his head to the side and coughed like his lungs were splitting open, inner breath turbid, the sensation of suffocation accordingly inundating him. Suddenly, a hand was pressed against the center of his back, and a soft current of internal force spread throughout his meridians and channels instantaneously, faintly clearing up his consciousness. Seeing him slowly pass this breath, Josishu instantly curbed his efforts. "You're out of strength, but your wound is more serious in comparison. It needs to be wrapped up to staunch the bleeding, else I'll be too afraid to help you set your internal force into motion. Then, he looked into Wen Kexing's eyes. I'll ask you this, do you want to live? The other watched him in silence for a very, very long time. Will you, leave me? Smiling lightly, Zhou Zisha shook his head. Like his life depended on it, Wen Kexing clenched his jaw, grabbed his hand, and forcibly propped himself up. Live, why wouldn't I want to live? Why couldn't I live? All those shameless, vile people of the world get to live, so why can't I? I have to. He could no longer easily get his breath back, body swaying as he panted non-stop. Zhou Zisha sighed, sealed up his main acupoints, then picked him up in his arms, going off the mountain. He brought the blood-covered man to that small town. It took no less than 2 days for Wen Kexing to awaken, where he could barely manage to take in some food and drink. After a few more days, Zhou Zishu hired a carriage to bring them to Luoyang, but, right before they set out, they happened to run into Gao Xiaolian and Zhang Chenling. The latter was still in shock. As soon as he saw him, he immediately threw himself at him and cried painfully, sobbing and hiccuping. Shifu! Brother Cao, he. Gao Xiaolian's eyes were red, as well. Zhou Zishu sighed. I know, he gently said, and placed his palm on top of the other's head to soothe him. Immediately after that, Zhang Chenling bust out another sentence, Shifu. I killed someone, too. I killed someone. Zhou Zishu's hand froze. Wen Kexing, who was reclined inside the carriage, also shifted his gaze over, looking at the little devil in astonishment. Gao Xiaolian clenched her fists. I had my part in that, too. Don't cry, that guy was a villain. He deserved to be killed. We got lost on Fenja Mountain, then came across a man dressed in gaudy clothes. After following him for a bit, we learned that he was actually the boss of the poisonous scorpions. For some reason, though, his arm had been cut off, and he looked to have been hit with poisoned needles. Zhou Zishu looked pleased, while Wen Kexing couldn't resist letting out hushed laughter. After that, the guy seemed like he couldn't keep his scorpions under control, Zhang Chenling supplemented, and they fought each other. You two used the confusion to eliminate the scorpion? Wen Kexing quietly asked. Zhang Chenling made a stalling noise, feeling that even if the other party had been a bad person, his own act of using another's crisis was also very despicable. The man laughed out loud. This was what it was to have a guardian deity watching over you. Afterwards, Gao Xiaolian dried her tears and said farewell to them, heading back for Gao Manor. After enduring all sorts of trials, the girl had grown up over the span of a night. Zhang Chenling went with Zhou Zishu and Wen Kexing to Luoyang, and after joining up with Lord Seventh and the Great Shaman, the ashes of Rong Xian and Madame Rong were brought up Changming. Following a month of recuperation, the Great Shaman began to remove the nails from Zhou Zishu, reconnecting his meridians. Heavy snow fell from the heavens on Changming that day. Wen Kexing stood outside the room, seeming to be mentally calm even as he heard cries coming from inside. Lord Seventh pat him on the shoulder all of a sudden. Don't worry, all right. If it was anyone else, there would be only a 30% certainty, but it's Zishu. Nothing will go wrong. Wen Kexing turned his head to look at him. Lord Seventh smiled. Since he was able to bear with putting the nails in himself way back when, why would he be scared when they're pulled out? His succeeding words disintegrated, but a small smile was on his face, as if he was reminiscing about something. Lord Seventh appeared to have an odd charisma that made one stand by his side, then calm down in his wake. Even so, Wen Kexing's calm lasted only a short moment, after which he turned away and left. This pretty boy really does look like a Hulijing, he thought to himself. I need to be on guard. This action completely mystified Lord Seventh himself. After being in a comatose for 3 months, Zhou Zishu woke up at last. He felt like an entire set of heavy shackles had been unburdened from him, his entire body becoming lighter except for his right hand that was being gripped tightly by someone who was apparently exhausted, as he was leaning to the side for a doze. Josishu was momentarily distracted, thinking of the events that had led to this point just as if they were from a lifetime ago. In the end, however, he simply stared at their entwined hands for a while, smiling gently. Yesterday, he had died when he had gone to bed, then awoken as someone new the next. The years that had passed were for nothing other than awaiting someone like this, who could stay with him both morning and night, holding his hand. End chapter. Faraway Wanderers. Extra chapters. 01, on Changming. Changming Mountain was coated in snow all year round. Upon looking all around, everything would be a vast white, like misty clouds beneath the feet. In the surrounding was a couple of tiny thatched huts and one small courtyard, resembling a place that an immortal would live apart from the world. Lord Seventh was currently warming up wine. A rich aroma faintly wafted out, then far away via the window, the spitting image of unfiltered wine with green foam, and a little red clay stove. The man seemed to be able to live life in elegance and comfort, even if he had been reduced to living in a forest deep in the mountains. With a book in his hands, the great shaman sat beside him, and would occasionally be puzzled, then raise his head to ask some questions. Lord Seventh's lowered eyes were staring at the tiny stove. He didn't even need to think about any of what was being asked, as the answers came naturally to him. Had he not been born into the prince estate, he would have been full of enough literature to examine his way to fame. While the great shaman idly chatted with him, he went to clasp his hand. "Are you cold?" he whispered. Lord Seventh shook his head at that, drawing the stove closer. Gazing out the window, he suddenly smiled. "Take a look at this place. It could be described as having 1,000 mountains with no flying birds, and 10,000 paths with no human tracks. It's only been a few days, yet I can't even tell what night it is." The great shaman's heart jumped. "You like it here?" Lord Seventh looked at him from the side and a grin. "If I said that I did, would you be able to accompany me in living here?" The other considered this for a while, looking serious. "Luta is still young, but if you really do like it here, I'll go back and instruct him properly, then after a few years pass, I'll hand Nanjiang over to him so that I can come live with you. How does that sound?" Taken aback for a second, Lord Seventh then put out a laugh and lightly smacked him on the forehead. "You really are a dull club that takes everything seriously," he mumbled. "Who would want to live in this hellscape? The air's cold and the ground's frozen. Nanjiang's still fun, at least." Then lowering his head, he smiled. "It's ready to drink." He brought out wine cups, carefully poured 2 of them, handed one to the great shaman, and took one for himself. Putting it under his nose, he inhaled deeply, then narrowed his eyes. As it goes, 1 boon covers for 100 ugliness. Only those that still smell of alcohol after being boiled belong to the top grade. There is a saying, 3 cups, and I enter the great Dao, 1 do, and I'm one with nature. There are 100 kinds of anxieties in the human world, and only this can solve them, as... His speech was suddenly interrupted by a bunch of crashing and crunching noises. He sighed, his refined mood of drinking as he recited poetry immediately getting swept away, and took a sullen sip. "Those 2 fleas never give it a rest all day long," he rebuked in a whisper. "I can tell that Josishu's just fine, so let's say our goodbyes in 2 days' time. My ears need to be at peace." Zhangqingling's exercise didn't normally make so much noise, so, generally speaking, this over-the-top, building-demolishing ruckus had to be from his 2 shifas exchanging blows. The great shaman had said that as long as Josishu was able to wake up, the most dangerous phase would have since passed. It was obvious how the man had endured a lot of toughening up. He had been weakened for the first few days when he had woken up, but after no more than a third to half a month, he was already able to get up. A few more days after that, he became a little more energetic, running and jumping, starting without stopping. It was mystery as to who was provoking who in the pair, but, in Lord Seventh's words, you can't clap with just one hand. They squabbled from morning till evening, then sat down nicely for dinner, which could also result in a quarrel that began with arguing, then went to pinching each other with chopsticks. Lord Seventh had found it interesting to watch at the beginning, but it got annoying later on. He started to refuse to eat with those two mandrills lest he got caught in the crossfire. Rather bewildered, Lord Seventh had to lament. Zishu used to be a very collected person. Why is, sheesh. Getting close to cinnabar really does make you red, and getting close to ink really does make you black. The great shaman smiled a little. This is good, actually. The process of reconstructing one's meridians is acutely painful, and straightening them back out afterwards is also very difficult. It's extremely cold here, too. It wouldn't be easy for an ordinary person to regain full motion of their body, but Manor Lord Ch is not only active, he's forcing his meridians to come apart. He will be a bit pained during this period, but it'll be good for him in the future. Wen Kexing changed the direction of Zishu's shoulder with a palm, as if wanting to encircle his entire body in his arms. The other used that momentum to flip over one of his arms, and before he landed, he used a foot to lift up Wen Kexing's chin, forcing him to draw a step back. After that, he flicked his fingers out like a gale, stealthily attacking him. Wen Kexing inadvertently got hit, and his knees went soft, nearly putting him to kneel in one of his knees. However, the second he was falling, he rolled to the side and grabbed Zishu's calf, making them both tumble into a ball. Apart from ice, there was snow, and Lord Seventh, the great shaman, and Zhang Chenling were all staying far away from them, so the ground was clear, and not that filthy. After rolling a few full turns, Wen Kexing pinned Zishu underneath him with a wily grin, his hands placed on either side of the other's head. Give up yet? Zishu was in preliminary recovery from his serious injury, so he wasn't as strong as he had been before, panting slightly. That was a cheap trick. Wen Kexing cozied up to him, lowering his voice with a smile. You were clearly the one to be underhanded first. Hey, Lao Wen. Wen Kexing hummed as he licked his neck. What? I'm saying. Zishu said a few words with seeming carelessness, but Wen Kexing didn't quite catch them, somewhat puzzled. In that split second of thought, he got elbowed in the chest, letting out a grunt, and was instantly lifted off. The sky whirled around as both his arms got pinned behind his back, following which he was pressed onto the ground. Zishu imitated the hoodlum look the other had just had, blowing into his ear with a chuckle. How about this? Do you give up yet? It took Wen Kexing a good deal of effort to turn his head and see him. Are you trying to tie me up, Asu? Zishu raised his brows. That's a good idea. He went and tapped on the other's acupoints. Seeing that he was motionless for the time being, he relaxed slightly, sat to the side, then wiped off his face. My little wife, your husband got a head full of sweat just from restraining you, he said ruefully. A hand suddenly reached out and pressed against his forehead. All he saw was the should have been frozen Wen Kexing slowly getting up. Oh? Let me see, you really are sweating? Don't catch a cold. You actually altered your acupoints. Under his shock, Zishu had already escaped over a jang away from him, on guard as he watched him. Wen Kexing threw him a flirty look. I can do even more than that. Afterwards, the two pounced yet again, continuing their earth-shaking brawl. As such, the great shaman had actually misinterpreted them a little. The reason why they fought all day was for that meridian stuff, but another cause stemmed from an issue that needed to be settled urgently. The outcome was not yet determined, the top and the bottom is not yet decided, and both of them had fires in their hearts that could only be vented as they quibbled. At first, Zhang Chenling had been earnest in running over to spectate them, thinking about what he could learn. Later on, he had discovered that their fights were too bitter, and he could only learn moves such as Black Tiger digs out the heart, Monkey steals the peach, and Universe goes topsy-turvy, which really had no reference value. Lamenting the fact that both of these experts had returned to their primal states, he henceforth practiced his own martial arts, style by move. The youth was confused, though. His Shifu found that his style lacked grace and finesse but wasn't his own rolling about the ground with Senior when absolutely graceless. The two masters had been thoroughly reduced to two ruffians, and, beyond their intentions, accidentally ended up impeding their students' progress with their conduct. Only after Josishu took his daily dose of medicine each evening would they call a truce. The great shaman bestowed medicine based on the person. For someone that was frail-bodied and wouldn't be able to take it, his prescription would be light and easy, but for Josishu, who would be fine no matter what torment came at him, he gave nothing but powerful medicine. After taking it, the latter would feel terrible all over for a short while, clenching his teeth as he withstood it, and then after the effect had passed, he would always be soaked in sweat. Following a bath then a rest, he would recuperate enough energy to continue hopping all over the place the very next day. Once Josishu had taken this medicine for the last time, the great shaman and Lord Seventh said farewell and left the day after. Even though Nanjiang had always been inhabited by honest folk and the shamanette Luta was overseeing it, they had been away from home for too long. Seeing them off, it was then the first day that Josishu didn't have to bear with drinking that medicine that was akin to death by 1,000 cuts, causing that night to be bizarrely peaceful. When Kexing carried a jug of wine into the room, then shook it in front of Josishu's face. The other took it with no formality in the least. He then meandered over to stick himself to Josishu's side, eyes shining brightly as he stared at his profile. Getting stared at so blatantly, Josishu drank down a mouthful of wine. "What are you looking at?" When Kexing grinned. "Aren't you afraid that I've drugged that?" "With what kind of drug?" Josishu asked back. "What kind do you think?" When Kexing retorted. Josishu shot him a look, sneering in mockery. "You wouldn't dare to slip me an aphrodisiac. Aren't you afraid that my wild nature would break out and put a handle on you?" When Kexing frowned, feigning upset. "Right. That really is a bit of a worry." Propping up his chin, he looked Josishu up and down, then sighed and shook his head. "You should just let me make the move. Otherwise, I'm thinking that if it keeps going down like this, we'll both end up practicing monks." The other glanced at him. "Why wouldn't it be you letting me make the move?" When Kexing's perverted hand slowly reached out and touched the side of his waist, ambiguously rubbing up and down. "I'd let you try out all sorts of moves, but..." His wrist got snatched by Josishu. They contained their strength so as not to tear the roof off the room, then began wrangling again. Zhang Chenling passed them as he was returning from his practice, finding this surprising sight unsurprising, since he knew that they were duking it out again. He thought to himself, why can't they just spend time together properly? Every single day, they bicker like children. Seeing how very offbeat they were, he thus sighed at the vicissitudes of his own life, then silently turned to go back to his own room. Following 300 rounds, neither of the two's strength could keep holding up, so they took a break. When Kexing snatched the wine pot, took a couple big swigs of it, then exhaled. After sprawling out on his back atop the bed, he waved his hand. "No more. I don't have the energy today." Josishu sighed in relief, like he had been waiting for those words to come out of this great one. He then sat on the edge of the bed and gave him a little push inwards. "Scoot over." When Kexing shifted in, facing the bed curtains above, as if suddenly distracted. "Asu, after this bout, you'll be fully recovered," he said, after a long time of staring blankly. "Will you go with me for a trip down the mountain?" Josishu shut his eyes in rest, giving an mn at that. "I'm pretty much done with it right now, I can go." "What are you going to do?" Wen Kexing was silent. The other waited for a long while. Feeling this a bit strange, he opened his eyes and tilted his head, gazing straight at him. The man still looked like his mind was wandering somewhere beyond the sky. What is it? Wen Kexing's eyelids trembled, and he managed out a smile. It's nothing. Back then, my parents' corpses were aired out in the wilderness, and they didn't even get a monument. I've been unfilial. For over 20 years, I've never gone back to take a look. I should probably. Zhou Zishu sighed, then slowly reached his arms out to loop around his waist. Wen Kexing obediently turned on his side, putting one hand on the other's back. His fingers were placed on Zhou Zishu's shoulder blades, and he unconsciously traced over their outlines, burying his face into his shoulder. Osyang, too, he said, muffled. While you were recovering in town, I went back, found her and Xiao Xiao, and put them to rest in the ground together, Zhou Zishu said. Thank you, Wen Kexing answered hazily, his next words nearly inaudible as his arms that gathered Zhou Zishu close seemed to tighten. For half my life, I've been a solitary person. I had thought that I'd have Osyang, but she's gone. That time you were in a coma, I wasn't as confident as the great shaman. I thought that, if you... Zhou Zishu suddenly realized that his shoulder was apparently wet. He couldn't resist bowing his head, but when Kexing waved his hand to extinguish the lights, choking up slightly. Don't look at me. Having never been one to comfort another, Zhou Zishu could only allow him to hold him tight. Slowly, Wen Kexing's hands began to wander on him. He was slightly uneasy, but the man didn't have even a tiny bit of a joking overtone. All he did was constantly call his name, as if highly uncertain, bringing with it a slight terror and desperation. Zhou Zishu sighed on the inside, thinking, screw it, he's so pitiful. I'll let him, just this once. He used enormous self-restraint to relax. For the first time in his entire life, he was handing himself over to someone else without any defenses. Hair tangling, when their heads were rubbing together, the man only muttered to him with a bit of entreaty, Asu, don't ever leave me. Even in this utterly frigid land, there were threads of warmth. They set themselves free from beneath the bed curtains, then slowly spread outwards, as if they could let a flower bloom. At daybreak the next morning, Zhou Zishu slept late, which was in a rarity. Upon opening his eyes to see the one in his arms, Wen Kexing had a faint, perfectly content smile. As soon as he moved, Zhou Zishu came to. He felt like every single thing on his body was off, and that he was being firmly embraced by a certain someone. He opened his mouth in want to swear at him, but Wen Kexing had long been guarded against this action of his. In that split second the other had opened his eyes, he stifled his self-satisfied grin, then gazed deeply into his eyes with a complicated expression, looking like a million emotions were within him. When Zhou Zishu, the nagger that hadn't yet spoken, caught sight of his red-rimmed eyes, he harshly swallowed everything back down, not knowing what he ought to say. He had no choice but to stiffly turn his back to him. If you're getting up, do it by yourself. Don't bug me, he mumbled. Wen Kexing immediately hugged him from behind, laid down again, and put his fake pitiable expression away when the other couldn't see. Elated, he thought of how a soft heart was way more enticing than a soft waist. However, once his short moment of happiness was done, his worries started up again. Furtively opening his eyes to peek at the one beside him, he thought, but, every time I want to do this from now on, will I have to put on a crying act? That seems like a bit too much of a tragedy. End chapter.